for the Uplift. The Uplift is a show that is all about experiencing the moment because that is where things start to make sense. Wonderful to see you here. This is Real Growth, Clear Direction, expanding the possibilities for you. All right. So appreciate everybody for being here. While you start coming on in, algorithm, I want you to understand that we are going to be talking about today the stories that we live by, the stories that we live by in our neuroscience, right? So appreciate everybody for being here. While you're coming on in, let me know where it is that you're watching from, what state, what city, whatever that is that you're comfortable with sharing. And let me know where you're from. Always love to see how far our group or our community is extending. Appreciate you for all being here. Joseph, wonderful to see you. Jules, wonderful to see you. All right, so what we are doing, we've been talking about familiar, right? The word familiar, and we've been looking at it from a lot of different angles. And all throughout the week, we're going to be looking at it a little bit differently. And so what it is that we've been talking about, Jen, wonderful to see you this morning. What it is that we've been discussing is, how it is that our brain, our nervous system, and our body works outside of our consciousness, right? Outside of our consciousness. And so we are going to have a fun time today because there's going to be a question. It's going to be a question. This is something that is a little bit of a teaser, right? So my question is, for a two-person story, how many sides are there? For a two-person story, how many sides are there? Okay. Have you ever been in a situation where you are in the same room and yet you felt like you were in a totally different room when you heard somebody describing what it is that you experienced? Are you somebody who has been in a room and yet you wonder why it is that somebody else might have had a different experience than you did? Go ahead. Appreciate the likes and the shares. Appreciate that. The goal that we have in regards to the rose garden. Appreciate that as well. All right. So again, here's the question: how many sides to a two-person story? How many sides are there to a two-person story? That's the question that we're going to be asking throughout the show. Good morning, Christine. Wonderful to see you. Jules, wonderful to see you. Jen, wonderful to see you. All right. So when we're sitting there and we're talking about, Lisa, wonderful to see you. When we're talking about familiar, right? When we're talking about how it is that the brain works, right? We learned yesterday that familiar is also predictability, right? Familiar is predictability. And we started seeing how it is that things can be different, right? Things can be ultimately different with just a little bit more information, with just a little bit of a change in information. We used one of the examples that we used predominantly throughout the show was, your favorite song. And it's a song that you've sung to yourself, 20, 30, 40 times, maybe even 100 times. And yet, one day you were listening to that song that you thought that you knew from inside and out. And then all of a sudden you heard a lyric that you never heard before because your awareness was brought to that particular lyric this time. And you happen to hear a lyric that you never heard before. And here's another twist. It literally changed the meaning of the song that you thought that you knew inside and out for years, if not decades. Right? And then we learned that, well, the reason why that is because our attention was brought to it. Our attention, our awareness was brought to it. And when our awareness became the attention to that, then all of a sudden we put a meaning to it. Well, if we were missing a lyric, no matter how small or how large, if we were missing a lyric, then we would have an entirely different interpretation of that song, right? So we're going to go a little bit deeper than that. Now, today we're going to be talking about our stories, right? Our stories and what it is that we live by because of our stories. But the question today is, and this is something that I want everybody to think about, and go ahead and give me some answers as you go along. How many sides are to a two-person story? How many sides are to a two-person story? I have a student in about 40 minutes, so hang till then. Cool. I appreciate it. How many sides? I promise you'll get the answer by that time. 12. 12 sides. Holy cow. Oh my goodness. A two-person story, not 20. Okay, yeah, two-person story. How many sides are to a two-person story? When you go and you think about yesterday's episode, when we talked about what's familiar, Lisa, wonderful to see you. When we talked about what's familiar and how it is that we gain awareness and how all of a sudden our nervous system changes. The two people in the 10 newspapers reporting on it. Don't forget social media, right? Then you have, what we learned is that when we brought awareness to a different understanding, we were able to see a different possibility. And that's where it is that I want to grow from as a community. Queen Mary, wonderful to see you this morning. This is why it is that I want to grow from as a community when it comes to the uplift. As you gain awareness, you then gain an understanding. So if you have a different awareness to something, you're going to have a different understanding. And so with that being the possibility, you now have your capacity expanded. Your capacity is expanded so that you now can see what's possible versus what's been familiar. And wonderful to see you this morning. So when we're talking from the lens of what it is that we're familiar to, we're talking about predictability. Because remember, your brain is all about survival first, live second, connect third, right? So it's about predictability. It's about what's going to filter to your consciousness for you to literally make an understanding of that, make a meaningful understanding of that, to then make an interpretation, to then be able to see what the limits are. When we were able to give a little bit of a twist, we were able to give a little bit of a twist to the story where there was another lyric that we did not know. All of a sudden, what it is that we understand a song to be changes. All of a sudden it changes, has a different meaning, has a different feeling, right? And so that awareness allowed us to be able to then reset, right? And it allowed us to be able to reset and to be able to look in a different way. Today's question is how many sides to a two-person story? How many sides are there to a two-person story? Okay, so what we're going to be talking about is now our story. Now, we discussed this previously, but we're going to go a little bit deeper than that, right? Because we know that the story starts on the surface. We know that the story starts on the surface. Today, we're going to actually learn on why it is that the brain and the nervous system literally takes that story from the surface and brings it down. 3. I meant 3. Okay, so three sides to the story. Okay, that sounds familiar, right? That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Okay, how many sides are to a two-person story? Go ahead and give your guess. Go ahead and give your guess. There's no wrong answers or anything like that. Nobody's going to judge or anything in that sense. Michelle, wonderful to see you. So when we're talking about things from what it is that we're discussing as familiar, we're going to learn throughout the week how this is all happening. And there's going to be different segments of the week that's going to show you a little bit different than what you may have already known. And that allows you to be able to see an understanding change and also to be able to see what's possible versus what's familiar. All right, one person, second person, court record, truth, 4. Yeah, well, okay, all right. But see, the thing is that the court record there, I don't know where that came from. I know where it came from, but we got to go back into how many sides to the story, right? Because the court record hopefully is going to be the factual record, you would think, right? So, all right, listen, this is the Uplift, right? I'm your host, Dutch Phoenix. Now, people do not come here for what it is that they already know. No, instead, they come here for the moment, to experience the moment, because that is where things start to make sense. That's where things start to make sense. Listen, that's the uplift. Real growth, clear direction, expanding what's possible for you. All right. So it has to be said, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a medical professional in any sense of the matter. And I'm not here to replace anybody's medical professional. So I help the person while the professionals treat the patient. That's the way I look at it. I've always looked at it that way for over 15 years. What I do is that I utilize my own personal experiences. I also utilize my professional career, which I used to be a medical researcher, both in the medical realm of things as well as mental health realm of things. And every day I learn something new to be able to hone in on the craft, to be able to help people understand differently. Val, wonderful to see you. So I learned, over the past few years, I've been studying neuroscience, as well as I've been studying behavioral patterns. And I've also been studying how it is that our brain and our nervous system literally works. Not what it is that we interpret or what it is that we feel or anything in that sense, how it literally works. And I also look at different approaches to be able to go and help someone because people learn differently. People sometimes learn when it's casual. People sometimes learn when it's logical. Some people learn when it's emotional. So we have a lot of different reasons why it is that we go there. So you can see, I help the person while the professionals treat the patient. Okay, this is not to replace any medical professional at all. All right, question still stands. How many sides are to a story, a two-person story? How many sides are there to a two-person story? I'll give you a hint. I haven't seen the answer yet. So, how many sides to a two-person story? Go ahead and give me a number. So, while we keep on talking. So, when we're talking from the standpoint of I'm sticking with four. Okay. When we're talking about the aspect of what's familiar, right? Have you ever had a situation, right, where you're in a room and you see, hear, feel, you have different senses, and you have a totally different experience in the room than what somebody else might. I like even numbers. Okay. So when you have a totally different experience than what somebody else might have experienced in that room. I'll go a little bit further. Take two brothers, right? Let's say that they're twins. They're in the life that they're in, right? They have the same parents. They go to the same school. They virtually have the same friends, right? They pretty much are, as close to each other as they are. I mean, like they literally are called identical twins. And yet, one has an interpretation of life, and the other has an entirely different interpretation of that life. Have you ever thought about that, right? Have you ever had a situation as to where, like, you were in a conversation with someone, and as you you walked away with a interpretation or an understanding, and yet the person that you were talking to, same exact conversation, had an entirely different understanding? If you had that happen, go ahead and put that to me. Go ahead and put that to me into the chat. That happens, right? Freedom fighter, wonderful to see you. When we're sitting there and we're thinking about why it is that somebody can have the exact same experience, the exact same situation, and yet there's two different interpretations, we sit there and we wonder why that is. Somebody who has dealt with mental health, right? I've dealt with PTSD. Well, the thing about PTSD is that we really don't know, especially if you have multiple situations that have been influenced by PTSD. We really don't know which one it was or why it was. We don't know why it is that all of a sudden there's a post-traumatic stress for someone who experienced the exact same thing as somebody who doesn't have post-traumatic stress. We really don't know why that is, except for the history of that person, right? So that needs to be thought about because that's really the moment, right? Go ahead and type the moment, right? That's the moment that we all of a sudden look at things different. Because even though that we can be in the exact same situation, we can be in the exact same, almost identical circumstances, we can receive it differently. We can interpret it differently. And we can have an emotional attachment to it differently. The reason why that is because we're different. We're different. Go ahead and type the word moment. Type the word moment into the chat because that is what makes us special and unique. We are different people. It doesn't matter whether we're an identical twin of another, we have something that's special and uniqueness about all of us. Okay? Now, here's the thing. When you're sitting there and you're thinking about a conversation, and I'm going to tell you that the number is 7. The number is 7, and it's not because I like the number, Christine. It's because the number is 7. The number is 7, and I'll explain in a little bit. Okay, so here's the deal. I had a situation with my own personal experience. When I was younger, just before high school, my parents were getting to the point as to where they wanted to shape my life for what's going to be the future. And so they had informed me that if I didn't get my grades up, then I was going to go to a military Catholic school. Well, my grades were like a B, right? And so I went ahead and I got it up to a B plus. Well, you would think that I would be good, right? You would think everything's going to be all right. I'm going to be staying right where the hell it is that I am. Next thing I know, I am in orientation for a military Catholic school. Now, I didn't have to move or anything like that, but I was now going to a different school. I'm in an orientation for a military Catholic school. Trying to figure out why it is that I'm sitting here, right? Because I'm sitting here thinking, well, wait a minute, the deal is if I got my grades up, then I would be able to stay in my hometown school, right? Now, it needs to be said this school was number 6 in the country in academics. I learned a ton in this school. I learned a ton in academics. I learned a ton in regards to demeanor. I learned a ton in regards to respect. I learned a ton in regards to tradition. I learned a ton of things that I have carried on throughout my life. But I also can tell you that there's not one individual from that school that I keep in touch with. Not one individual. I was literally in this school system for 4 years. And I didn't make an impact enough for there to be a communication that would be long lasting. Not one. Even in social media, not one. One thing that I also was dealing with when it came to those years is I was dealing with what was going on in my mind, right? I was going in with clinical depression. I was dealing with PTSD. I was dealing with a lot of stuff that I didn't understand then that I now understand a little bit differently now, right? And so what was happening is that I was gaining a whole lot on the surface, but deep down, I just wasn't getting there. I just wasn't getting there. Tommy Gunn, wonderful to see you. So when I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, and if you go ahead and I appreciate all the likes and I appreciate all the shares, if you want to share out to your friends and people that you're associated with here, go ahead and press on my nose, and then that'll go ahead and give you a list of your 60 favorite people there, and you can go ahead and share it out to your 60 friends from there. Getting back to my story, I happen to be where now I had a traumatic experience, right? I also had a traumatic experience when it came to this school, right? There was situations as to where there were things that had occurred that you know, had stayed with me for a while. I also had the situation where I literally would like be doing the perp walk because I had to be in a uniform. And so I literally had to walk in front of my hometown high school to get on a short bus, right? A short bus, a yellow short bus is what it was called, right? To be able to take me to now the new school that I'm going to be going to. So I literally like had to walk in front of the people who I used to be popular with in my hometown in a now a uniform and which kind of like looked like mailman pants, right? Going to school every morning. So there was a lot of different things that had occurred. Now here's the thing. Now I'm sitting there, fast forward. I'm about 38 years old, and I'm in the pool with my mom, just me and my mom, and we're having one of those candid conversations. You know what that's like, right? You've all had that situation where you had a candid conversation with someone, somebody that, it's like, look, we're going to put our defenses down. We're not going to go swinging at each other. We're not going to go toe to toe. We're just going to sit and we're just going to have a conversation, right? One of those candid conversations. I had about a handful of them throughout my life, right? So I'm sitting there, actually standing in the pool, and my mom's on one of the ladies' lounge floats. And I'm sitting there and I said, not for nothing. I said, but was I that much of a hoodlum as a kid? Was I that much of a hoodlum as a kid? Well, my mom turned around and she looked at me and she said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, Mom, I said, you sent me to a military Catholic school. I said, most people don't get sent to a school like that unless if you're looking to structure them, like they were out of line and you needed to structure them. And so that's why it is I'm asking the question. And she said, Shane, and my first name's Shane, my nickname's Dutch. She goes, we sent you to the best school that we could afford. Go ahead and write in the word moment in the chat. Write in the word moment in the chat because this was a moment for me. This was a moment for me because all of a sudden, what I was interpreting all this time, what I was assessing an emotional attachment to all this time, what it is that I had experienced and the way that I experienced it all this time was literally turned around in a quick sentence. We sent you to the best school that we could afford. It was my interpretation. It was my understanding. It was also my experiences that I was having that they weren't aware of. They didn't realize what it is that was happening. They didn't realize that it was somewhat traumatic. They didn't realize that it was also in a situation that I didn't understand what the hell was the difference here. Because I think about it now and I'm saying to myself, if my parents came to me and said, Dutch, we're going to send you to the best school that we can afford, you can damn well bet I'm going to go through every wall to ensure that their investment is going to pay off. You can guarantee that I'm going to go above and beyond to experience it in every way, shape, or form because I would have known that they invested in me and therefore I'm going to then give to them. But instead, it was shown as a punishment. It was shown not only as a punishment, but it was also a misunderstanding. And so I literally walked my way through 4 years of high school and didn't develop in the way that you would have expected. And in some ways, I took a step back when it came to my development of it because I started realizing what the word rejection was. I started realizing what was the words I don't fit. I started feeling like, that there was something wrong with me because I didn't connect in the way that you would have thought. I had thought I had people that were, that I was a little bit close to, you know, but I learned later that that impact didn't last, right? So the answer to the question is, how many sides of the story are to a two-person story is seven. The answer is seven. The reason why that is because one, you immediately assign an appraisal to you what it is that you receive. You immediately have an emotion that you appraise something being said to you. You immediately have something that is appraised that's being said to you, right? You're appraising it immediately. Then, number two is your interpretation. You go ahead and you put an interpretation to that now appraisal, that feeling that you have immediately to it, right? After you put the interpretation to it, you now then put an emotional attachment to it. You then go ahead and put an emotional attachment to it and realize that you are only one, but then times two, you have six. But then there's the factual base of that story. So the answer is really seven. But go ahead and put in the chat, go ahead and put the moment. Carl, I appreciate you for being here. Go ahead and put the moment where it is in the chat here. What happens is that people think it's what they hear and then they go. There's different sides that happen because you immediately receive a feeling to something that's being said to you. How many people have had the situation that go ahead and put blue hearts into the chat? If you've heard the social experiment where somebody tells a story into a number of people in the room. Say that like there's 30 people in the room. And how the story begins on the first person, but when it ends up being in the last person, it's an entirely different story, right? Go ahead and put blue hearts into the chat. Patty, wonderful to see you this morning. So when you sit there and you're in a room full of people and you're telling the story, you start with one person and it goes down the line, that story ends up being different than what it is that it started out being, right? Does that make sense? That story ends up being different than what it started out being. Why is that? Because it started out as a fact, right? It started out, here's the story. This is simple. It's not hard whatsoever. You bring it to another person, you would expect that it would be the same story. You bring it to a third person, you would expect that the second person would tell the same story to that third person the exact same way that the first person said in the beginning. But the problem being is that it's all about how somebody appraises what it is that they're hearing immediately. They appraise it for a feeling immediately. And that's how the brain works. Remember, the brain is meant to survive first, live second, connect third. So it's literally like immediately trying to understand what it is that's happening here. What is that's being said to me? What is that's around me? It's figuring out all of these things immediately, nanoseconds, right? So you have your immediate receival. Then you have your interpretation. So by the time that you go ahead and turn around and tell somebody the same story that it started out with the first person, now you have an interpretation of that story from your immediate feeling. And so therefore, your story ends up changing. It's not consciously changing. It's literally as a result of what is anything but conscious. Then go ahead, as the story then leaves you, right, and goes down to the next person, the next person, the next person after that, and the next person after that. Next thing you know, you have an assignment. You assign an emotional attachment to what it is that you heard. You assign an emotional attachment to what it is that you heard. So you have the immediate receival, you have the interpretation, and then you have the emotional attachment to what it is that you heard. Now, here's the thing. How many of you, go ahead and put blue hearts into the chat, where you had experienced something a long time ago? But when you're sitting there and you then have that thought of that experience, you immediately feel something that is same or similar to what it is that you experienced before. Same or similar to what it is that you experienced before. No matter whether or not that it was a day ago, a month ago, or a year ago, you still have that same feeling. You have that same reaction. Reason why is because you have that emotional attachment. You have that process that is attached to that experience. And so therefore, it's ready to run. Remember, your brain is all about predictability. Your brain is about familiarity. It wants to have things to be familiar. It wants things to be predictable because that's easier to then ensure safety, ensure survival. And when I say survival, I don't necessarily mean our living and breathing. I mean in regards to our identity. And we're going to be talking about that throughout the week and also in weeks to come. Because our identity is the one that assesses that emotional attachment to it, right? And so therefore the brain literally associates that identity with that reaction. And so now what ends up happening is that it's ensuring that that identity exists, that that identity continues to exist. Why? Because that's predictable and that's familiar and therefore is easier to ensure that you survive. Okay? If you're with me, if you're with me, go ahead and say that's I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that. So again, we're not talking about your living and breathing all the time. We're talking about your identity. Your identity as you were when you received that answer, when you received that experience, when you received that situation, right? People get hit by the blind side all the time, right? People get hit by the blind side all the time. When they say the blind side, the reason why that is because they weren't expecting it. They were not expecting it. Therefore, it's called the blind side. It wasn't something that they were aware of. It wasn't something that they could prepare themselves for. And therefore, it's called the blind side. Often what ends up happening is that it is traumatic more often than not because you don't have that process of where you receive, you interpret, and then you put the emotional attachment to it. It's automatically emotional. And because of it being automatically emotional, remember who's holding our emotions. Our emotions are being held by our inner child. So there, we're now looking at a totally different association. I'm a 55-year-old man. If I go ahead and I get hit by the blind side today, I'm not going to assess it as a 55-year-old man because my inner child is literally in the low teens, and that's after I've worked with it for a while, right? So literally, I'm going to associate a teenager's emotional attachment to getting hit by the blind side. So you could see where you're going to have a different association to that. As a 55-year-old man, I'm going to sit there and I'm going to logically figure out why in the world that this occurred. Why did this happen? Why is it that this is going on, right? I would have immediately looked at it from that standpoint. As an emotional child, I'm only asking, why do you hurt me? That's all I'm asking, because that's the emotional maturity that I have at the time. And it's called stunted, right? We have what's called our stunted growth. And so what ended up happening is that I would get hit by the blind side, and then my emotional age would then show, which is in the teens. Also, when I'm sitting there and I deal with a certain condition, and when it comes to abandonment is something that is very, very traumatic for me. I fully believe that it's a life or the other side of things situation, right? I fully believe that there's a living and then there's the other side of things in that situation because of what it is that I feel. The reason why is because I have an association of an emotional age that is even younger than the teenage years. Because when people had left my life, in my experience, had left my life for reasons that I didn't understand, right? And that I then put the emotional attachment to, I was much younger than even in my teenage years. So now when somebody sits there, even to this day, if I have a friendship that doesn't work out, or if I have a relationship doesn't work out, I have an entirely a different process than what some may think I would have. Being a 55-year-old man, you should be able to roll with things. You should be able to, you should have experienced this already. You should have been able to figure it out and say, you know what, it didn't work out. It wasn't meant to work out. It's going to work out in the future, right? And so literally you would sit there and then you would deal with it. You're stuck with me, and Julie. Thank you. I appreciate that, and I love that. As a 55-year-old man, absolutely that's the case. As somebody who is emotionally aged younger than a teenager, now you have an entirely different situation. Now you have an entirely different situation. You have an entirely different interpretation. You have an entirely different emotional attachment to it, to where literally I have trouble breathing. I literally have trouble breathing when somebody ends up walking away. I literally freeze. I wouldn't associate it to PTSD, but it's similar, having both. So when you are thinking about your association to an experience, when you are thinking about your association to the story, you want to look at it from the standpoint of, well, why is that? You see, when I started learning, well, wait, I'm not looking at it from a 55-year-old man. I'm looking at it from a young child. All of a sudden, I'm giving myself space. I'm giving myself a little bit of clarity, am I not? Right? This is where now I can then make an assessment and an understanding, a new understanding, as well as a new interpretation, and therefore now a new intentional choice. But I wouldn't be able to do that if I didn't see it that way. And as we know, this show is all about uncovering those deeper realities that influence our thoughts, our feelings, and our choices. So when you're looking at it from a lot of different scenarios, right? I want you to look at the different scenarios of how it is that you have associated the emotional attachment to a circumstance, to a situation. Maybe it's something that happened yesterday. Maybe it's something that happened months ago. Maybe it's something that happened years ago. But I want you to just merely just notice it. I don't want you to judge yourself. I don't want you to judge yourself because this is why it is the way that I am, or this is where it is that I am because of this. I don't want you to judge yourself like that. I just want you to merely see it. I just want you to merely see it and to experience that, right? To experience that. Because as you see it, you then have the clarity. Then you have the opportunity to then be in your discernment. In your discernment, you then have the choice for an intentional choice, right? You have an intentional choice. That's why when I end the show here, I literally say the choice is yours now. Because as we reveal the deeper reality, you now have a different awareness. You have an awareness to it, you notice it, then you have a different understanding. Okay? You can have a different understanding to what it is that you now have awareness to. And as you have a different understanding, you can also have a different prospect, right? You can have a different prospect to where now you can see, okay, I know what this is. Now I can learn and I can see what the opposite of this is. I know what limits are. Now I can see where the possibilities are. I could see where this has been limiting me for however long that it has. And now I can see that that's been limiting me. Therefore, I need to cut that anchor to be able to see what's possible. That's what this show is all about. And I'm not here to be a teacher. A lot of people sit there and it's like, oh, he's a teacher or oh, he's a coach. There's different types of dynamics in both. Teachers I love. I think they're awesome. I really do. But at the same time, I don't want to be a teacher because that has a negative connotation because it gives the impression outside of school that I know more than you. And that may be true, but if you're feeling that, you may have a different association to that. You may have a different emotional attachment to that. So I don't go ahead and say that I'm a teacher. I also don't go ahead and say that I'm a coach because that would be a little bit of a impersonation syndrome. Because as a coach, it would be rah rah sis boom bye. It would be like, hey, look, it doesn't matter what happened to you. Now you need to go and you need to go make things happen. Now you need to make things work. Okay, so now you need to go roll. Doesn't matter what it has happened to you. Now you got to go forward. So with that being the case, Jules, go ahead and take that person out of there. So when that situation's happening, you got to have that rah rah sis boom bye. You got to have all that intensity, and I can do that. I love sports. I can definitely do that. It's something that I can empower somebody all the time. But that's not really me, and that's why it is that I say that this is a mentor-led space. I'm a mentor. I'm somebody that provokes thought, and then you then have notice. You have awareness that has you understand things a little bit differently than what you did before the episode started. And as that occurs, you have a different association to it. You have a different emotional attachment to it. You start to see for what things are today versus where it is that they were then. Right? And so it allows you to then be able to expand your capacity, expand who it is that you are. You now have the knowledge of what it is that's been holding you back. You have the knowledge of what it is that's been limiting you. Now you have the ability to see what's possible. Now you have the ability to feel what your full capacity can be like. And so when you are thinking about those times, as to where, those situations where you found yourself having an emotional attachment and where you found yourself reacting to a certain situation or circumstance that may have happened in the past, whether it be recent or further down the road, all I want you to do is notice that. All I want you to do is just take notice of it. We're going to be working this for a long time. And as we do, then you'll start seeing how it is that we can start getting you to looking at the possibilities rather than the limitations. All right? Listen, there's not one episode that I talk about that can be the end all, the be all in one episode. There's not one topic that I talk about that can be the end all, the be all in a week's worth of episodes because we continually evolve. And people learn at different paces, right? And they also learn in different ways. So we're going to continually work with this, and we're going to make it everyday conversation so that it's something that can really make a difference in your life, and you can see that for yourself and do it for yourself, all right? All right, listen, take today's moment with you, okay? I fully believe that if you're able to see what's clearly happening, then you can then take that and be as intentional as you're meant to be, right? This is your choice now. And that's what the uplift is. Real growth, clear direction, expanding what's possible for you.